A little focus goes a long way, and a whole lot of focus, well, that puts you light years ahead of the competition. That's why at Vernon, they only focus on heating and cooling. And as the heating and cooling specialists, they're great at it, especially after 43 years. Get your AC ready for summer with Vernon's $69 spring tune-up. You heard right, only $69. Go to VernonHeating.com. Vernon, the heating and cooling specialists.
Get to the chopper! Here's Johnny. This is Sparta! So serious. Autobots, roll out. I am Iron.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Well, welcome to this podcast review for April 25th, 2023. And I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Jay Ledbetter.
Thanks for joining us, everybody. Jay, thanks for showing up for this conversation.
Oh, wow. Wasn't ready for that one. I'm normally the king of the puns. That you got me. I mean, it's the easiest pun in the world, but
it is the easiest one.
It's so bad, it's good.
It was low-hanging fruit. It was right there.
The lowest. It was on the ground. It fell off the tree.
Very much on the ground. But I'm excited for this conversation. Obviously, as you already know by the title of this review, we're going to be talking about Kelly Reichardt's latest film, Showing Up. And I am just coming back from the theater to see this film. So I am very fresh on it. Have absolutely no notes, and this isn't really the kind of film that you want to walk into without having any sort of thought on it. So this is going to be a fun conversation.
Perfect
Jay.
Conditions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I'm a huge Kelly Reichardt fan. So we sort of pseudo established this in our Suzume review that we did last week. Because I am technically still on hiatus, sort of. As many of you know, my family, we recently brought a new child into the world, which is very exciting. So I've been away from the show for a few weeks and slowly working my way back. Won't be on the main show. I'm not sure if this will come out after the main show. Probably, I would venture a guess that this will come out after episode 531 is already out in the universe. I will not be on that show. Not sure when my next main show appearance will be, but I've been seeing these films. My lovely wife has allowed me to go off and see some of these movies. And I told Jay and Brendan and Ryan a few weeks ago that if I can be on Showing Up, come hell or high water, I will be there if at all possible, because Kelly Reichardt...
It's a JD special.
It's a JD special. She is absolutely one of my favorite directors working today. If you look back at the InSession Film Archive, anytime Kelly Reichardt is brought up, you will hear me raving about her. So I had to be here. This was one of my most, if not my most anticipated film of the year. So I made time. Here I am.
Was First Cow your number one?
My number one.
Of 2020? Yep. That's right. Yep.
My number one.
It was my, like 2 or 3 or something. But
yeah, love that one. Wendy and Lucy was my favorite film of 2008. I believe it was when that came out. Meek's Cut Off in my top 10 the year that it came out. Certain Women certainly on that list for me as well. So,
Wendy and Lucy is your fave, right?
Mm-hmm. Of Reichardt's films, yes, but I don't know. I keep thinking about First Cow a lot. Like that's a film I go back to often. In time, that might be that I could see that one kind of trumping and becoming my new favorite Reichardt film.
I'll say this about First Cow: it might be her most rewatchable movie.
Yeah, that's true. Certainly more so than something like Old Joy, for example, or even the one that we're about to talk about and Showing Up.
Yes, certainly. I mean, like Meek's Cut Off is a real kind of downer of a movie. Mm-hmm. We'll talk about it. There's certainly I've got some comparisons to talk about between First Cow and this film, and kind of her different philosophies that she's making both of those films and some of her others as well. But it's an interesting thing to discuss.
It is. Well, let's first introduce Showing Up. So obviously this is directed by the great Kelly Reichardt. It is written by Reichardt as well as John Raymond. It stars the wonderful Michelle Williams, Hong Chow, who had a fantastic year last year, starting off 2023 in a great way with this film as well. John Magaro, speaking of First Cow, he makes an appearance in this as well. Judd Hirsch has a little role here. If you're not familiar with Showing Up, and for many of you listening, maybe just checking this out, maybe you don't know what it is, and I certainly don't blame you, but it is about a sculptor who is preparing to open a new show, and she tries to work amidst the daily dramas of family and friends in the midst of all of that. So I gave my thoughts on Kelly Reichardt. I certainly love her. I guess before we get into Showing Up, though, your experience with Reichardt may be a little different than me.
No, Kelly Reichardt is without a doubt one of the best, most unique voices in modern cinema. I don't know that I love her quite as much as you do, but she is. Anytime a Kelly Reichardt movie comes out, and I was kind of late to the party. I probably didn't get into her movies until 2, 3, 4 years ago or something. But she is a must-watch. I mean, she's appointment viewing anytime one of her movies comes out. So
yeah,
it doesn't matter what it's about. You don't even have to tell me the plot of the movie, who's in it, whatever. Kelly Reichardt's making a movie. I'm there. Let's do it. I'm pumped. And I was very excited for this one. I mean, it's, again, First Cow was in my top 5. I want to say it was in my top 3 of that year. And so certainly drafting off of that into her next film, it's immediately, I'm pumped. I'm excited. I'm ready to see this thing. Doesn't matter what it is. New Kelly Reichardt movie. Let's go.
Let's go. Well, all right. Well, I think with all of that laid out on the table, then what did you think of Showing Up?
You know, it's like I said, I mean, we're dealing with a really unique voice here. I think Reichardt's pacing is very far from traditional. It is very unique to her.
Yeah.
And I think her themes are rich and complex. And both of those traits really remain present in Showing Up. But I got to say, I didn't find myself quite as engrossed with this film as I have been with much of her other work.
Okay.
And I kind of understand that the very slow build of this film, the snowball structure of the film where you're just rolling downhill and the emotions get bigger and bigger, it's kind of built into the movie. But it takes a little while to find its clever, wry groove. And it's really interesting that after the more narratively driven First, at least by Kelly Reichardt standards, which is, she is not the most narratively driven filmmaker of all time.
Not
and that's,
at all.
I think, to her benefit. It makes her films totally different and fascinating. But after First Cow, which had a lot more story than some of her other movies, Showing Up is really a return to her specific, deliberately undramatic works. Stuff like Wendy and Lucy, stuff like Old Joy, more in that vein. But it all does eventually culminate in this fascinatingly pitched finale that maybe for the first time in her work verges on magical realism that I found really enjoyable. I thought that was a really nice touch to the film.
Yeah.
Again, the wind up wasn't entirely my cup of tea, although I appreciated a lot of the very, very, very dry, low key sense of humor.
Yeah.
And there is a lot to appreciate about the film. For me, first and foremost, it's the Michelle Williams performance, which I think is brilliantly understated. There's it's so interesting to see her in The Fabelmans, where she's very big. She's really going for it. And then in this film, she is almost just a blank slate. But you do see this build underneath her of this anxiety, of this anger, of these little things chipping away at her stillness. And she always is able to maintain this facade throughout. It's almost, an embodiment of Kelly Reichardt's movies themselves, which are so still and so understated and so unassuming, but they pack underneath this power to them. And I think Williams captures that element of Kelly Reichardt's films so brilliantly in this movie. It's such an unglamorous performance that does squeeze a really impressive amount of humor from this seemingly straight-faced movie. And I do think there's a lot to unpack with the themes of this film on the artistic process, the concept of family, both found family and family by blood. But the film failed to really entirely get its hooks in me with the texture and the raw emotion that I'm accustomed to from Reichardt. Still a good film, no doubt about it. I recommend anybody who is connected with Reichardt's films at all, absolutely go seek this thing out. And it's very possible that, again, with the tempo of this movie, the very idiosyncratic pitch that this film has, even by Reichardt standards, it's stripped down. And because of that, maybe it will get better for me on subsequent viewings. But this is lower tier Reichardt. Again, we're grading on a curve because she's made basically nothing but great films. And she's remains one of the best directors working. But that was kind of my takeaway as I was leaving the theater.
Yeah, I mean, and as I noted, I just left the theater about an hour or so as of the time we are recording this. So my thoughts on this will likely evolve. In fact, I was thinking about how maybe we could do a showing up part 2, maybe some Patreon bonus content in a few weeks, because I haven't had time to gather my thoughts, to write them down in a cohesive way. And these are always my favorite conversations that we have each year when a Kelly Reichardt film comes out. I know that I'm certainly going to have more to talk about with this film as the weeks go on. It does sound like I'm a lot higher on this film than you. I really liked it a lot. In fact, I might go as far as to say that this is my favorite film of the year so far. I enjoyed it. But to your point, this film is very contemplative. It often pauses just to observe our central characters here in the moment as they're creating art or simply indulging in whatever it is that they're doing. And it does render this gentle quality that we see in a lot of Reichardt films. It's very tender. This is also very subtly funny, as you were talking about. There's some great dry humor to this film that you don't often see in her films. This harkens back to maybe something like Old Joy. I don't know if we've seen humor like this from her since that film. And I just love that this is, at its core, in terms of pacing and rhythm, it's a slice of life movie, but it's one that's the most sliciest I've ever seen, perhaps. It's like this takes that notion to the nth degree. Yeah. But that's what I love about Reichardt's films, as you're talking about. Like, she isn't interested in conventional plot or drama or over emotion as much as she is in character and theme and how those two things become intertwined. And again, as I'm processing that now out of the theater, that was easily the biggest takeaway for me here. Now, I'm still trying to figure out what all of that really is here, and perhaps this conversation will help solidify some of that for me, or again, in the next few weeks, as we maybe get to this film again sometime later. But I do love the contrast that we see between Lizzie, the Michelle Williams character here, and Joe, played by Hong Chow. Both of those performances are fantastic. Yeah. I definitely have a lot more to say about them as we go. But there is this interesting juxtaposition between the two, and that Lizzie is introverted. She lacks confidence. Her loneliness is certainly tangible. Whereas with Joe, she's more extroverted. She has these 2 shows coming up. People admire her artwork. She's more social. But perhaps the juxtaposition that resonates the most for me is how Reichardt exposes amiability, in the sense that Joe comes off as a good friend to Lizzie. She's the one who finds this pigeon and decides to bandage it up. But in reality, Joe is not always that kind to Lizzie. She's a terrible landlord. Yeah. Perhaps we can get into that as well. Her remarks toward Lizzie's artwork could be interpreted as patronizing. She essentially pawns off this pigeon to Lizzie unexpectedly. And then you flip the other side of that coin, and Lizzie at times can seem vulnerable and perhaps jealous of Joe, and certainly brash in some scenes. But underneath, there's an earnestness in her attention and in her intentions. She obviously cares about her artwork and wants it to look a certain way. There's a diligence there. She cares about her brother Sean and wants to make sure that he's okay. There's a couple of times where she just wants her family to pick up the phone. So like there's, this interesting maneuvering that Reichardt does here in terms of those two, and how on the surface they might convey a certain emotion, but as the film goes on, it subverts that in these fascinating ways. And then you couple that with Reichardt's filmmaking and craft. And, I love how she uses the camera. I love the editing here. Again, it's arresting in a very understated way that I tend to love. Like slow cinema, give me that all day. And Reichardt's simply one of the best at it.
Yeah, I mean, Lizzie, you talk about Lizzie being kind of internal. She's grumpy. She's
a little grumposaurus, yeah.
And you see over the course of the film, it's really this mundanity that is just slowly, again, it's that snowball structure of the movie where it does start out as intentionally, I don't want to say boring is the word, but intentionally slow cinema, I guess. Let's put it that way. Yeah, intentionally plotless, intentionally meandering, because you're just supposed to feel like, yes, there is this sense of boredom that she possesses, and then the only escape she has is when she's kind of doing her art. But even her art is connected to these people and these things that she finds incredibly frustrating. And it's all of those things sort of to the side of what she wants to do with her life and how she wants to make her living. And she's not totally poor. She's not struggling entirely financially. She is making a living. And in many ways, that is enough to keep her striving to pursue what she loves. Her passion is her art. She understands that pursuing that art means she'll have to do some stuff on the side. She cannot entirely detach from everything around her and pursue exclusively her art. She has to make money in other ways in addition to her sculpting. And she's okay with that. There is this acceptance of kind of her role that to me kind of reflects the way that Reichardt views her role in the world of film. Her movies are not making $50 million. Maybe she'll direct Kraven the Hunter too. I don't know. Probably not.
Could you imagine? Oh my God.
She seems to have really accepted her place within the film world. And she's not just directing movies. She's teaching about film. Imagine Kelly Reichardt being your professor.
Yeah.
It's a crazy thought.
I know. Wow.
Probably very intimidating. And I've heard that she's very forthright with her students and what she thinks about their potential in the world of film. But she has carved out this niche where people who really love the world of film largely consider her one of the best filmmakers in the world. But again, her style is so unique, so uncommercial, that
very distinctive.
She just has to accept that I am going to have my sensibility. I am going to try to realize everything that I want to say about the world through my art. Yeah. And there's something really beautiful about the way that she is just okay with her spot she finds satisfaction in the art itself, not necessarily just the success that comes with it. However, there is the financial reality of following something that you love and dream and are passionate about and is very personal to you. You still have to find a way to make money by doing that, whether that is by teaching it or maybe being sort of on the fringes in some way of your industry. And Lizzie is operating in a very similar realm here, a much smaller scale, right? She's just working at this art school and making these small sculptures and having her first kind of art show. And it's a very big deal for her. It has the potential to kind of take her to another level. And you see just how seriously she is taking this opportunity. But at the end of the day, what this movie really ends up being about, as much as anything, is about being willing to accept your failures or maybe your shortcomings. And at the end of the day, maybe the passion is the reward. Yeah. And I think that's a really beautiful sentiment, especially coming from Reichardt.
I agree. I don't know if Reichardt has vocalized this specifically, but I don't think there's any ambiguity that Lizzie is some sort of echo chamber of her own experience working within the film world. You noted that she is working as a film professor as well as making movies. And as you noted, Lizzie is an administrator at this college. That's her day job. And then she's also working on her art on the side, very similar to how Kelly Reichardt is maneuvering herself within the film world. So, that certainly is comparable here. And I do think that Reichardt is using her experience to say something about commercialization and making a living, whereas the kind of art that she wants to make, that Kelly Reichardt wants to make, it's not going to render her the millions of dollars if she was to, let's say, do Craven Hunter, the sequel. Like she wants to
could happen.
It could, but she wants to do her art similarly to Lizzie isn't going to jump into anything commercial. What she's passionate about, what she's interested in doing are these very distinctive sculptures of these women in motion, which is fascinating all on its own. And as a result, it does put Lizzie in this spot of understanding that she has to have this job. And if she wants to continue to do her passion, it's something she's got to do on her own time. And as a result, coupled with perhaps this introspective personality she has, it's going to make her life perhaps a little bit lonely. And when we see her spending all of this time by herself, I think that's part of what makes her a little bit brash at times, coupled with what we learn about her family and the troubles there, or just the overarching mundanity of everyday life. I somewhat joked earlier how this film is the sliciest of life movies. But Kelly Reichardt, I think, is really intentional in that, and keeping things at an organic pace where we can truly understand what it is that she is experiencing in terms of just the daily grind, the daily life that she's living, that we can all experience. In fact, it was a little funny. I was thinking about this a moment ago as we were prepping to come on to this podcast, because I was fervently hurrying to try to jot down any sort of notes I could coming into this conversation. And in the middle of that, my son interrupts and wants to give me a good night hug. And then I have to help feed the baby and put him down. So even as I'm trying to quote unquote do my thing, my art, if you will, which is getting ready for this podcast, I am distracted by everyday life, it coming in and out. And that's just an hour's worth of time, where this film is really about that in a lot of ways, where Lizzie is distracted by this new pigeon that comes in. And then there's her family life and everything with Joe, not just as a friend, but Joe being her landlord, she doesn't have hot water, and how many times do I have to ask to get the hot water heater fixed? And Joe just doesn't care. Like, like all of these things are interrupting her life as she's trying to not only do the work and do the art, but there's a deadline she's got to meet. She's got a show in a few days, and she has to get all of this stuff done. And so it's interesting to see the tethering of all of that. And also, I have to give credit to Sophia Simonello, because I believe she noted this on social media as well. I just happened to glance at it and saw as we were getting ready to do this conversation, because she noted that, this interesting contradiction where the students at this art school, they get to indulge in their art in this free-spirited way where they don't have to really worry about adult mundanities and responsibilities, whereas the adult characters in this film, in particular Lizzie, if they want to do their arc, they also have to worry about those mundanities. They have to worry about those responsibilities. So the art isn't as clean, so to speak, which I think is actually a brilliant observation about this film, and how art can transform from this earnest purity that you may have when you're young and you're learning to craft your craft, I guess. Whereas once you get into the real world, it's not so simple. And those textures here, they're not overt. It's done in a very Kelly Reichardt way, but I think it's quite great in the end.
Yeah, that is a great point. And even in addition to, or maybe even more importantly than this dichotomy between youth and aging, is really the commercial realities of what's going on there, which are the students are paying for the right to be untethered from the realities of the enterprise. Whereas Lizzie and all of her coworkers, they're doing it because they need to get paid so that they can even attempt to do their true passion, their art. And it's an incredibly clever script. As I'm thinking about it more, I think it's such a sharply written film. I think about the cat character. Lizzie's cat is a really essential figure to the story. And it's fascinating that maybe the most propulsive, narratively pertinent part of the film is Lizzie caring for that pigeon. I guess Lizzie and Joe, but mostly Lizzie. And that's the most Reichardt thing ever, is just taking care of a pigeon.
She has to have an animal. An animal's got to be here somewhere.
But what's so fascinating about that to me is the reason they have to take care of the pigeon is because her cat attacks the pigeon in the bathroom, and she finds the cat trying to eat the pigeon, essentially. And to me, that works as a really good metaphor for Lizzie herself, because that cat is just acting of its nature, right? That's how cats operate. And I think it's telling that it's Lizzie's cat, because it's kind of in Lizzie's nature to distance herself from other people, and in some ways to aggravate other people. She's not getting invited to some of the parties that her coworkers are having. There is this connection that she clearly feels to one degree or another with the character played by Andre 3000.
Yeah, who we forgot to mention is in this movie. Andre 3000.
Yes.
I love that he's working
or
with
Andre Benjamin, however he goes by now. I don't know.
I just love, though, like Claire Denis, Kelly Reichardt, like he's just working with these awesome art directors.
he's a fascinating art. I mean, I'm sure Kelly Reichardt admires the heck out of Andre Benjamin. I mean,
I'm sure. Yeah.
Talk about a guy who walks to the beat of his own drum.
Yeah.
He's one of the greatest examples of that of his generation, no doubt. But there's this clear fondness that Lizzie has for his character that is not reciprocated, and frustratingly for her, he actually has a fondness for Joe, who they talk about a love-hate relationship. Never let your friend be your landlord is kind of maybe the most important lesson of this film. But their relationship is such this wonderful push and pull. I mean, I mentioned Williams in my opening statements, and you mentioned Chow a little bit, but she really is remarkable. She's one of those now too that's just kind of must see every time she's in a movie. You can. I did not care for The Whale whatsoever. She is, in my opinion, the best performance in that movie, and the lead actor of that film won an Oscar for Best Actor. So, to me, she's just really on a roll right now, especially as this supporting character that kind of steals the show in any movie that she is in, while not doing these super showy performances. She is very much part of the ensemble, but her performance pierces through and really leaves an impression on you. But it's just so interesting to see kind of these ideas of a person's nature and how that impacts their relationships with other people. And that's again shown in her brother's clear mental illness, this thing that he is just a part of him and shapes all of his relationships with the people around him. So it's very much about this idea of the innate within you and how that can drive you in many different directions as well.
I completely agree. And, we mentioned earlier that Lizzie is, to your word there, innately introspective, like she's a little quiet and reserved. And when you couple that with, again, the responsibilities of being an adult, having to have a job and then pursuing her passions on the side, it leaves little room for her to perhaps pursue romanticism, for example, or to be social. And I do love that Kelly Reichardt goes out of her way to demonstrate those yearnings in Lizzie without it being overt or melodramatic here in any sort of way. Where, again, she observes Joe and the social gatherings at her apartment, or the Eric character played by Andre Benjamin, as you're talking about, when he comes over for the night. That's something that she is attuned to. And we see her reaction to it. Again, how observant this movie is and how it simply rests and allows for us to see these characters, simply be in the moment. And I also love how Kelly Reichardt does that, oftentimes blurring the lines between her daily life, those observations, and her art, right? That moment when Eric comes over, she is sitting there at her desk working on her sculpture, but is very aware of what is happening, aware that Joe and Eric have come back to the apartment together and are going to spend the night together as she's working on her art. So again, it's blurring those lines. Same thing when she notices a social gathering later on in the film as well. And so I do love all of those nuances. And to me, I think that's what makes Michelle Williams' performance here incredible. And I know that she was getting a lot of Oscar love for her performance last year in The Fabelmans. And I do think she is very good in that film, but in some ways, I think her performance here is actually more nuanced. I would say that this is a better performance because it's a trickier,
yes. I was going to say a more difficult performance.
Yeah, it is certainly more challenging because she is having to convey that loneliness, but also those yearnings for humanism, for togetherness, without the character ever grappling with that in an overt way. Amongst like all the other stuff that she's having to deal with, such as, her family life, like everything with her brother and all of the tension that is going on there as well. So like, there's so much that is happening with even though this film is in many ways very plotless, it certainly has a narrative backbone. It's not, Terrence Malick in Song to Song. There's a backbone here. Again, I say that with love. I love Malick.
That movie's fantastic.
It's not quite meandering like that, though. Like this has a backbone. There's a foundation, but it's not driven by drama. It's not driven by plot. It's driven by that slice of life. That kind of structure, and the way that Reichardt and Michelle Williams kind of navigate that with Lizzie, and bringing out those various nuances, having to give us that duality almost in every scene, I think is quite great. And I think this film suffers if she's any less than what she is.
Yeah, and any less committed to her worldview, because this is you used the word slow cinema. I mean, it's utterly undramatic for the most part. As frustrated as Lizzie is with everything going on around her, the most angry she really gets is just leaving a voicemail, which again is maybe part of her nature. Is her. You can tell that there is so much bubbling underneath her. She is at between the stress of her show, the frustration with Joe as a landlord, maybe some of this internalization of her loneliness. She is about to explode.
Yeah.
But all she can do is leave a voicemail. She's not confrontational. That's just not how she operates.
And same thing to your point, when she has to ask her mom, aka her boss, to have the day off to work on her art. She's like, she's almost like begging, can I have the day off? And her mom doesn't respond. And in a brief moment, again, not overtly, but you can sense the panic. Like, I need you to respond to me. Can I have the day off? Like, again, she's about to burst.
Yeah.
A little brash about it, but it's because of the deadline, and she has to get these things done. But she isn't going to just lash out at her mother at the same time. And so she's just, again, has to repeat the question, can I have the day off, please? Like, you could definitely sense that duality that you're talking about in that moment as well.
And it just all remains so understated. In a different movie, her art show is this grand showing at some art warehouse where everybody is drinking champagne and dressed to the nines. And it's this really hyper stylized, heightened kind of show. But in a Kelly Reichardt movie, it's just this hole in the wall gallery.
It is, yeah.
That is no bigger than a coffee shop.
Yeah.
And there's, maybe 20 people that end up showing up. There's a cheese tray that ends up being a nice, providing a nice bit of humor when her brother shows up and just eats all the cheese after Lizzie had already said earlier that it was too much cheese.
Too much cheese, yeah.
But it's just, it just never deviates from its tone, which to me is one of the signs of a great filmmaker, is tonal control. Kelly Reichardt has an incredible grasp on the tones of her films. For the most part, I would say they're tonally similar. This one, I think, is a little snarkier than what we're used to from Reichardt, which I think is mostly effective. And it also makes the viewer work, I think, even more than some of her films do. If ever there was like a pressure test for how much Reichardt can you really handle, this might be it.
No, that is fair. I that was one of my first thoughts walking out of the theater as well, is that I loved it because her sensibilities are very much my taste. And also at the same time, if someone else walked out hating it, I get it. Look, I understand that it won't be for everybody, but I do love that. And I agree with you about the tonal precision of this film. I mean, this is a masterclass in tone storytelling, and how the characters, even when it indulges in the humor or the little tension that we do see here at times, it never really breaks through the overarching tone that she's wanting to set here. I do want to talk about the pigeon as well. I know we briefly mentioned it as well. It is such a massive crux to this film for Lizzie. And I think it's really interesting because initially it's this big distraction from her artwork and this deadline that she's trying to meet. But soon she almost starts to befriend it. Like, it becomes a symbol of comfort for her. And it's interesting to see, just in terms of Reichardt's visuals and of course the script as well, how it moves from being in her garage, which is like her studio there at her apartment, but then soon it moves into the apartment itself and then into her living room, forcing the aforementioned cat that you talked about earlier to be locked away in another room. And the cat is
she spends, I can't remember how much money on it at the vet.
yeah, like $150
a ridiculous
or
amount
something
of money
like that.
taking a pigeon to a vet. Come on.
Which the film makes fun of. There's another character that makes fun of her for taking a pigeon to the vet. So yeah, she spends $150 on that, but then brings like this pigeon that, as you stated earlier, it wasn't even just this distraction. Like she wanted nothing to do with it. Like there's this, again, darkly humorous moment, and forgive me if you mentioned this already earlier in the conversation, but like the cat does its thing to the bird and hurts the bird. And then as she's getting out of the apartment, she says something to the effect of, "Go die somewhere else." Like it's very direct. She wants nothing to do with it. And then once the irony forms itself and it's back in her home, it becomes antithetical. And not only does she not want it to die, like she wants it, like it becomes like this massive symbol of comfort for her, perhaps symbolic of how she's felt trapped and unable to fly, so to speak. And then that leads to that moment of, arguable magical realism you noted that we get at the very end of the film, which I quite loved as well. Like it's like subtly, like there's a subtle pathos to it at the end for me that I think quietly creeps up on you.
So what you're saying is it's a Kelly Reichardt film.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah, a lot of words to say that. Yeah.
There's a really defined payoff
Yeah.
at the end of First Cow.
Yes.
Which again is just kind of anomalous in her filmography. It's so weird to say that a movie like First Cow is her most accessible movie because it's First Cow, but it is. It really is.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this is, again, a reversal of that. And what I love so much about The Pigeon is you mentioned that it is a source of comfort for her, and I totally agree with you. But what I think she admires about The Pigeon is just the stillness, the calm of the pigeon, almost the indifference of the pigeon to the world around it, not just the world around it, but the pain that it is in. It is clearly in physical pain, but it remains this still figure that just exudes nothing but a sense of calm, which, transfers over to her in this moment where she feels like she is about to burst at the seams. For her to kind of see this being, which is naturally in its nature made to convey this level of calmness in a situation like the one that it is in. I think that's a powerful way to kind of show how she transforms over the course of the movie. And like you said, that really subtle pathos that is so effective.
And it speaks to what I mentioned in my opening thoughts about that dichotomy between Joe and Lizzie as it relates to Reichardt exposing amiability in both of those characters, because while Lizzie is a little abrasive at times, underneath I argued that she's very earnest in her intentions. And I think what you're talking about there in terms of how she feels about this pigeon and seeing its brokenness and perhaps seeing herself in that, you juxtapose that to Joe, who has the facade of, I care about this pigeon. I found it outside. Let's bandage it up. But then quickly pawns it off and doesn't really care about the bird the rest of the movie, which is indicative of how she treats Lizzie throughout the film, right? Like, I'll get to your problems in the water heater later. Like, I don't really care all that much, kind of a thing. So like, it's interesting how that idea that you're talking about brings credence to that dichotomy I mentioned earlier as well. So, which is to say, I agree. Like, I very much agree with that and do love the pigeon and kind of what it represents here. And it's perhaps what gives the film that backbone I mentioned earlier, because there isn't any plot to this film. It is very meandering.
That's the thread that weaves through the story and ends up being the most important metaphor of the entire movie.
100%. Yeah, which I really loved. So, any final thoughts, Jay, you have on Showing Up?
Yeah, just one final thought. Well, we need to talk about the Michelle Williams, Kelly Reichardt duo in the same way that we talk about De Niro, Scorsese,
yeah,
DiCaprio, Scorsese.
It's great. It's so
it's
good.
up there with one of the great actor director pairings of all time, in my opinion. They work so well together, and this, in many ways, to me, is kind of the culmination of that relationship. Where, in many ways, Michelle Williams is representing Kelly Reichardt in this movie. She is kind of a representation of Reichardt herself in this film, and I think she manages to kind of claw into her own relationship with this director to create, in some ways, a movie that we haven't seen quite from Kelly Reichardt before, especially with its really subtle, biting humor. And there's just a real sense of internalization. Really, if you could say one thing about every Kelly Reichardt film, it is that they feel so lived in.
Yeah.
They feel like a world that you could just step into and understand. And that is due in large part in this film to Michelle Williams's performance, as well as the performances of the other people in the film. But Michelle Williams is in basically every scene of this movie. She is critical to this film succeeding, and she does it with incredible aplomb. I would say early front runner, and there's still many, many months to go, many movies I got to see, but early front runner for Best Actress so far this year for me. I think she's
I agree.
Wonderful, and this film is good. Again, I have some problems with it. I think it spins its tires a little bit at times, and I think there's an argument to be made that, in much like I said in our Scream 6 review, that's the point. But it isn't always entirely effective as a piece of filmmaking for me.
And and that's very fair, and perhaps where we are the most divisive here. I do love the mundanity of this film, and very much the Scream 6 thing of that's the point. And I loved it even in the moment. I mean, I mentioned earlier how Reichardt simply pauses here to let these characters indulge in the craft or the emotion that they're feeling in the moment, whatever the case may be. For example, there's a moment where she's working on one of her sculptures, and Reichardt spends nearly 3 minutes on her readjusting the arms on this sculpture before taking it to the furnace. And it's a stationary shot, does not cut, just sits there for 2 or 3 minutes as we watch her do her thing. And it is certainly emblematic of quote unquote slow cinema. And perhaps it spins its tires a little bit much there. And I understand that. I don't disagree with the idea. I just find that effective in a Kelly Reichardt film where it wants to, spend time on these characters in that kind of a way. And I don't know. There's something about the Reichardt sensibility, the performance, perhaps just the art of the sculpture itself and what it represents here for Lizzie, that I find interesting, just seeing her be the artist that she wants to be, indulge in that passion. Like, she has a day job and maybe she's not as prominent as Joy, but we get to see her do her work and we see that she is very good at her craft. And to your point earlier about how this is maybe one of Reichardt's most cynical movies, maybe that is Reichardt saying, hey, look, you won't find me in a Marvel movie. Maybe I'm not the most prominent director. I'm not Ari Aster. People aren't going to talk about me like we see with Joe, but I am good at what I do, as we see with Lizzie there in that moment. And I think that's what those little scenes are meant to be, as well as going back to the idea we mentioned earlier that these characters, so Joy and Lizzie, they have to if they want to work, they don't get to indulge in their art like the students do. It comes with this extra texture that I think Reichardt wants us to experience alongside these characters. So as the film functioning as slow cinema, I think there is a point to it all. Not to go back to that phrasing once again. And I really liked it a lot. I think a lot of it also comes down to these performances. We talked about Michelle Williams, and I'm with you. For me, it is the performance of the year so far. Now, again, I have some catching up to do. I haven't seen Beau is Afraid yet, for example. There's other films I got to catch up on.
Well, that one's not going to crack it.
Fair enough. I did hear your guys' conversation about that. I haven't got to some films that have come out, and obviously there's, it's April. There's a lot more to go. But from what I've seen so far this year, and I've still seen quite a bit, Michelle Williams gives the performance of the year so far at this point anyway. And I think the film as a whole is one of my favorites of the year as well. But I do want to echo Hong Chau as well. She is really great here. When we talk about Jo and her coming off as, for the lack of a better phrase, for being a little bit of an asshole.
She's very good at being mean.
She's very good. Like, that's a credit to Hong Chau's performance. Like, she's very good. And I think she also threads this line, though, because, we talked about how she's not a great landlord. Maybe she's a little patronizing to Lizzie at times. She understands that as an artist, she's certainly higher up on the ladder, socially speaking anyway. But there is a friendship there that does crystallize at the end of the film still. Like when she walks in at the end as Lizzie is putting on her show and she walks in with the pigeon, like Lizzie isn't upset that Jo is there. Like as a friend, like she's still accepting that Jo is there and they have a cordial conversation. In fact, it's the two of them at the end of the film still being friends, so it's Hong Chau, I think, does such a great job of threading that needle of being antagonistic when she needs to be, but also giving credence to the idea that Lizzie would still be friends with this person. That I think is very good. Again, a tricky performance, and I think she nails it. So
everything about the movie is so specific that you really have to be pitch perfect with the performances, and I think everybody really is.
Yeah, I agree. My last thought, we've talked about First Cow a little bit, how it was my favorite film of the year of 2020. It was one of yours as well. I have to mention John Magaro, seeing him in a Kelly Reichardt film once again. It was really great. I love that. I loved, it's a small role, and I will say though, one of the more intense roles here. There's certainly a disturbance to Sean that the film evokes. Again, in a subtle way, not a Joker kind of way, more of the Kelly Reichardt understated kind of way.
And he can also be very funny.
And he could be very funny as well. Yeah. I mean, just him sitting there eating spaghetti. There's something about that visual that was just very funny on its own. But yeah, he's great. And I loved seeing him in this role. And Andre Benjamin, not in the film a ton, but I still love seeing him. Like, he still gives credence to Eric for the little bit he has to do. And I just love seeing him pop up in these little indie films from time to time is always a pleasure. With that, let us know if you agree or disagree with any of our takes here. You can hit us up on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd. You can email us InSessionFilm@gmail.com. I'd love to know how you all think about showing up in Kelly Reichardt as well. Before we get out of here, Jay, any final thoughts on anything before we leave?
I like this movie a little bit more as we've been talking about it. I will say that. And as kind of you've revealed some stuff that I hadn't thought about the film, and even some stuff popped into my head that I hadn't been thinking about. But I will say this as my final thesis on this movie. I don't love this movie. I am so glad that it exists.
Yeah, that's fair. That's as good of a final thought as anyone could say about this film of Kelly Reichardt. So, I do love that. This is one of those that's really hard to recommend. I don't know if I can just recommend this to anybody. If you're a Reichardt fan like I am, then absolutely go eat this up. You'll enjoy it. It's fantastic. But It also might just be one of those films that's distinctive to a certain sect of moviegoers out there, and that certainly is me. So I do love it. I would love to have a conversation about it again once I'm able to actually gather my thoughts on paper a little bit more. But I'm sure we'll talk about it more as the year goes on anyway, one way or another. Anyway, thanks for listening, everybody. Go listen to episode 531. It should be up as of, when this goes live, that episode should already be up. Brendan and Jay holding down the fort there. So go and check that out. Check out our new website. We got a brand new website, Jay.
Yeah.
InSessionFilm.com.
Looks great. Upgrade.
Yeah, I'm very happy with how it turned out. Special shout out to Kevin Brackett for his help and all of that. So go check out the new InSessionFilm.com. We will see you all next time on the In Session Film Podcast. Kelly Reichardt rules!
A little focus goes a long way, and a whole lot of focus, well, that puts you light years ahead of the competition. That's why at Vernon, they only focus on heating and cooling. And as the heating and cooling specialists, they're great at it, especially after 43 years. Get your AC ready for summer with Vernon's $69 spring tune-up. You heard right, only $69. Go to VernonHeating.com. Vernon, the heating and cooling specialists.